At 68 years old, Eleanor Ashby believed that loyalty was a kind of savings account, that every quiet sacrifice, every swallowed word, every meal cooked for people who never thanked her, all of it was being deposited somewhere safe, earning interest, waiting for the day it would be returned. She was wrong. For 40 years, she had loved a man, cared for his house, raised his children as her own, even when they looked at her like she was the help. And when Walter died, Nell sat in that lawyer's office in her best black dress, certain that 4 decades of devotion would finally be honored. Then the attorney began to read. The mansion to the children, the accounts to the children, the investments, every last dollar to the children. And Nell got what the will called the remainder, a rusty iron key, and an address scrawled by hand for a house in a town nobody had ever heard of. She wasn't just forgotten, she was erased, as if 40 years could be wiped clean with one signature. But here's what those greedy heirs didn't understand, what they were far too young and far too blind to see. Walter hadn't abandoned her. He'd been protecting her for 40 silent years. And what waited behind that rusty key would prove that real love never ever forgets the address. The coffee was still warm when Eleanor Ashby decided she would not cry. Not here. Not in this room. She sat alone on one side of a long mahogany table, polished so bright she could see her own reflection in it. A pale woman in a black dress, 68 years old, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting to be told she'd done something wrong. Across from her sat the children, Roland in the middle. Broad-shouldered, expensive suit, the gold watch his father had given him for some birthday Nell had wrapped the gift for. Vivian, on his left legs crossed, examining her manicure like the most fascinating thing in the world lived under her own fingernails. And Desmond on the right, phone in hand, thumbs moving, texting someone somewhere who mattered more than this. 3 of them. One of her. The way it had always been. Marcus Holloway cleared his throat at the head of the table. He'd handled Walter's estate for 20 years. He'd eaten dinner in Nell's home, laughed at Walter's jokes, complimented her roast chicken, and asked for the recipe and never used it the way people never do. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. That was the first thing she noticed. That was the thing that made the warm coffee turn cold in her stomach. Because a man who won't look at you already knows. Let me tell you about the 40 years before that morning. Because you can't understand what was taken from Nell unless you understand what she gave. It was 1984. She was 28, a secretary. The kind of woman nobody remembers in a photograph, but everybody relies on in an office. Quiet, efficient. The one who knew where every file was, who remembered every appointment, who refilled the coffee before anyone noticed it was empty. Walter Ashby was 44. A successful attorney, wealthy, respected. The kind of man who walked into a room and the room rearranged itself around him. He had 3 children from a marriage that had ended badly, and a presence that filled doorways, and a voice that made juries lean forward. When he asked her to dinner 6 months into her employment, she thought he had made a mistake. When he proposed 6 months after that, she said yes before he finished the sentence. She'd been raised to believe that a woman alone was a woman in danger. And here was safety. Here was a man who would never let her go hungry, never let her go cold, never let the world hurt her. She mistook a locked door for a fortress. But that's a thing you only understand much later. The children made themselves clear from the wedding day. Roland was 20 then, furious that his father had moved on. Vivian was 18, cold even at 18, which is a frightening thing to see in a girl that young. And Desmond was 16, confused, sullen, a boy who didn't know whether to be angry or sad, so he chose both. At the reception, Vivian found her by the cake table. The girl had a champagne flute in one hand and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "You'll never be our mother," she said, sweet as the frosting. "Don't even try." And Nell, God help her. Nell smiled back. "I wouldn't dream of replacing her," she said. "I'd just like to be your friend." Vivian laughed. She actually laughed. like Nell had told a joke. Then she walked away and never in 40 years looked back. But Nell tried anyway. You have to understand that about her. She tried anyway. For 40 years she tried. She remembered every birthday, every single one. She learned which child hated chocolate and which one was allergic to nuts and which one only pretended to be allergic to get attention. She sat through graduations where the family photos somehow never had room for her in the frame. She mailed thoughtful gifts to grandchildren who tore off the wrapping and never sent a thank you note. She kept their childhood bedrooms exactly as they'd left them, dusted weekly, as if the children might come home any day. They almost never did. She cooked Thanksgiving for people who complained about the stuffing. She hosted Christmas for people who left early. And through all of it, she built what she thought was a marriage. The house was in Brookline, a beautiful colonial that Walter had owned long before he ever met her. She managed it the way she'd once managed his office, flawlessly, invisibly. She entertained his colleagues and charmed his clients, and remembered the names of their wives and their children and their dogs. She supported his career, adapted to his schedule, stayed faithful and gentle and patient through 4 decades. And Walter was kind to her. I won't say he wasn't. He was kind in his way. He never raised his voice, never raised his hand. He made sure she had the right dress for every occasion and the right jewelry to go with it. He provided. Lord, did he provide. But there was always a distance, a room in the house of him that she was never allowed to enter. His home office, for one. Literal. Off limits. I need one space that's just mine, Nell. Surely you can understand that. And she did. She understood. She always understood. The bank accounts she never saw. When she asked once early on, he patted her hand like she was a child asking about the weather on the moon. Don't worry your pretty head about money, darling. That's my job. Your job is to make this house a home, and you do it beautifully. So she didn't worry. That was her great talent, you see. Not worrying, trusting, believing. And then there were the trips. Once a month, sometimes more. A weekend here, a long weekend there. Walter would pack a small bag and kiss her cheek and say he was going to the property he'd inherited from some relative. A place in the country. Nothing much. Somewhere quiet to decompress, to get away from the pressure of the firm. He never invited her. In 40 years, he never once invited her. And Nell, sweet, trusting Nell, packed his bag for him, folded his shirts, tucked a note in the side pocket, sometimes just to say she loved him. She kissed him goodbye, and she trusted him. That trust was the foundation of sand on which she'd built her entire adult life. She just didn't know it yet. Walter died on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 months before what would have been his 84th birthday. Nell found him when she brought his coffee. 7 o'clock sharp, a ritual they'd kept for 40 years. Her padding into the bedroom in her slippers, cup in hand, steam curling up into the gray morning light. She knew before she touched him. There's a stillness to a body that's different from sleep. The chest doesn't rise. The air in the room feels heavier somehow. She stood there, holding the coffee, steam still rising. And here is the thing she never told anyone. Beneath the shock, beneath the grief that would come later, there was something else. Something small and shameful and quiet. It felt like relief. She pushed the thought away the second it surfaced, buried it, was horrified at herself. What kind of woman feels relief when her husband dies? But the feeling had been there. And feelings like the truth have a way of waiting. The funeral was enormous. Walter had practiced law in Boston for the better part of 50 years, and it seemed like half the city came to mourn him. The church overflowed. Judges, senators' aides, former clients, society women in black hats that cost more than Nell's first car. The children sat in the front row. Roland, Vivian, Desmond, their spouses, their children. A portrait of a grieving family. United, photogenic, devastated for the cameras. They put Nell in the second row. For space, Roland explained with a tight little smile, in case any of your family needs to sit with you. Except Nell had no family. Her parents were long dead. She'd been an only child. And 40 years of being Walter's wife had quietly cost her the few friends she'd had before the marriage. One by one. Dinner invitations she had to decline because of Walter's schedule. Birthdays she missed. Friendships starved to death slowly when you stopped feeding them. So the second row sat empty beside her. A public sentence. You are not quite family. You don't quite belong with the blood. And one by one the eulogies came. Walter the brilliant legal mind. Walter the devoted father. Walter the pillar of the community, the mentor, the lion of the courtroom. Not one person mentioned Walter the husband. Not one person mentioned the woman who'd stood beside him for 40 years, who'd built his home, who'd brought him coffee at 7 o'clock every morning until the morning she found him cold. Nobody said her name. She sat in the second row and listened to 100 people describe a man she wasn't sure she'd ever fully known. At the reception afterward held at Roland's enormous house, Nell overheard Vivian by the catering table, surrounded by friends, dabbing at eyes that were completely perfectly dry. It's just so hard, Vivian was saying. Losing Daddy, but at least we still have each other. The real family. The real family. As if Nell had spent 40 years in a costume, playing a part, pretending. She set down her plate. She hadn't eaten anything. She wasn't hungry. She just wanted to go home. But she was about to learn she didn't have one. The reading of the will was 1 week later. Marcus Holloway's office downtown. Glass and steel and that mahogany table polished to a mirror. Nell dressed carefully that morning. The simple black dress. Her white hair done the way Walter had always liked it. Her hands trembled a little as she drove, but she told herself there was no reason to be nervous. 40 years of marriage. Surely he'd provided. Surely after 4 decades she would be taken care of. She still believed in him, you see. Right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. Marcus began with the formalities. Testamentary capacity, proper execution, the dull legal language that lawyers hide behind when they'd rather not say what comes next. Then he got to the numbers. Walter Ashby's estate is valued at approximately $8.7 million. Nell felt her shoulders drop an inch. Relief again. That word, 8.7 million. More than enough. More than enough to keep her safe for the rest of her life. Maybe Walter had been wise to keep the finances private. Maybe he'd been growing a nest egg all along for both of them. This includes the primary residence in Brookline, valued at $2.1 million. Investment and retirement accounts totaling approximately $6 million. And various other assets. She nodded, almost smiled. Then Marcus's voice changed. Got careful, the way a doctor's voice changes right before bad news. The Brookline residence is left in its entirety to Walter's children from his first marriage. Roland Ashby, Vivian Ashby Prescott, and Desmond Ashby, to be divided equally among them, or sold with the proceeds split 3 ways, as they see fit. The cold started at the base of her spine. The house, 40 years. That house, not hers. The investment accounts, similarly divided among the 3 children. The retirement accounts, the same. The cold was in her chest now, spreading, making it hard to pull a full breath. Nell heard her own voice come out small, barely there. Marcus, I don't understand. He looked up, and for 1 second she saw it. Pity, naked pity, on the face of a man who'd eaten her cooking. What about me? She whispered. What did Walter leave for me? He took a breath, the kind a man takes before he jumps off something high. I argued against the language, Nell. I want you to know that. He insisted. I'm required to read it verbatim. I'm so sorry. And then he read it. My wife, Eleanor Ashby, has lived comfortably at my expense for 40 years and has wanted for nothing during the course of our marriage. She has had the benefit of my wealth, my home, and my social standing, a lifestyle far beyond what she could have achieved on her own working as a secretary. This is more than adequate compensation for her companionship and for the domestic services she has provided. Each word, each word landed like a hand across her face. Companionship, domestic services, 40 years, reduced to the language of a contract, a receipt, a bill marked paid. The room tilted, just slightly, like the floor had shifted half an inch and forgotten to tell her. Across the table, Roland was smiling now, openly. Vivian was studying her nails again, that practiced indifference, but Nell saw the corner of her mouth twitch up. And Desmond hadn't even looked up from his phone. Click, 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 his thumbs, still texting. Marcus kept going. God help him, there was more. While I have appreciated Eleanor's presence in my home and her efficient management of domestic affairs, I believe my primary obligation is to my children, to my bloodline. They are my true legacy, the continuation of the Ashby name. Therefore, I leave to Eleanor Ashby only the following. Nell stopped breathing. One property located at 47 Oakwood Lane in the town of Harrogate, Massachusetts, along with all contents contained therein. This property is given to Eleanor with the express understanding that she will vacate the Brookline residence within 30 days of my death, as that property is needed by my rightful heirs. Silence. Complete silence. Except for the phone. Click. That was the sound that broke her. Not the words. The phone. The little plastic click of Desmond texting through the demolition of her entire life. 40 years. And she'd been demoted to staff. Severance paid. Contract terminated. Please vacate the premises. Vivian was the one who broke the silence. Of course she was. Daddy mentioned that Harrogate place years ago, her voice dripping with something that wanted to be sympathy but couldn't quite manage the costume. He inherited it from some distant uncle back in the 80s, said it was just an old falling down house, middle of nowhere. The property taxes were probably more than it was worth. She tilted her head, smiled. But at least you'll have a roof, Nell. That's something. Roland was already standing, already moving to business, because to him, that's all this was. We'll need to talk about the timeline for the Brookline house. We want to list it right away. Mark it strong. The sooner you're out, the sooner we can stage it. The will specifies 30 days. Marcus's voice had a sudden edge to it, steel under the silk. Nell is entitled to 30 full days. That is not negotiable. Of course. Roland smooth as ever. We're not unreasonable. Take your time, Nell. We understand this is a transition. A transition? Like she was a season. Like she was weather. Marcus slid a brown envelope across the polished table. His hand shook as he did it. She noticed that. A small kindness in a room with none. This contains the deed to the Harrogate property, now transferred to your name. There's a key and a note Walter asked me to include. Inside the envelope, two things. An iron key, old, rusted, the kind of key that belonged in a story about a castle, not in the hand of a widow in a glass office in downtown Boston. And a single sheet of Walter's expensive stationery, his handwriting. That precise, lawyerly hand she'd know anywhere. She'd seen it on 40 years of birthday cards, anniversary notes, grocery lists. She read it with the children watching. 47 Oakwood Lane, Harrogate, Massachusetts. Nell, this is yours now. Go there as soon as you can. You'll understand everything once you arrive. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before. But they were always watching, always listening, always looking for a way to challenge anything I try to do. Trust me one last time, my darling. All my love. Always. Walter. Trust me one last time. After this, after he'd stood up in this document in front of his children and his lawyer, and God and called her hired help, after he'd put her out of her own home with 30 days and a rusty key, Trust him. Nell folded the note. She put it back in the envelope. She picked up her purse, and she stood. Her legs didn't feel like hers, but they held. Nell, Marcus half rising, if you need anything, anything at all, please call me. I mean that. She nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She didn't turn around. She walked out of that office, past the receptionist, into the elevator, down to the parking garage, to her 10-year-old Honda sitting small and ordinary between two German cars that belonged to the children. And there, finally, with the door closed and no one watching, Eleanor Ashby put her forehead on the steering wheel, and she wept until there was nothing left. The 30 days that followed were a masterclass in quiet cruelty. The children came almost every day. They brought contractors, designers, real estate agents with measuring tapes and color swatches. They walked through the rooms of the only home Nell had known, while she was still living in it, discussing which walls to knock down, which rooms to gut. They never asked her to leave a room. They simply behaved as if she were already gone. A ghost, a draft, something you walk through without noticing. One morning she stood in the kitchen with her coffee. Vivian came through with a designer not even glancing at her. "We'll open up this whole space," Vivian was saying, gesturing at walls. The walls where Nell had hung 40 years of family photographs. "Knock all this out. Open concept. That's what sells now." Another afternoon, a real estate agent stood 3 feet from Nell's chair and discussed her like furniture. "The gardens are badly overgrown." He gestured out the window. At the rose beds Nell had planted that first hopeful spring. The herb garden she'd built from love. The perennials she'd designed to bloom in sequence March through November. "We'll need professional landscapers to clean all that up before we list. First impressions are everything." Those were her gardens. Every rose, every root, her hands, her years. And now they were obstacles to a sale. The nights were worse than the days, because in the dark the fear came. She'd lie in the master bedroom. Roland had graciously let her stay there. Not for her comfort. The furniture needs to stay for staging anyway. And her mind would spin out into the black. She was 68 years old. No job, no career, no work experience that meant anything to anyone. The last time she'd worked was 1984, 40 years ago, as a secretary in a world that no longer existed. Who would hire her? What could she possibly do? The Harrogate house was probably worthless. Just like Vivian said, maybe she could sell it for $50,000. 60 if she was lucky. That might last 3 years. 4 if she ate like a sparrow and never turned on the heat. And then what? 72 and destitute, a charity case, a government number, a bed in some facility for the elderly poor where the TV is always on too loud and nobody knows your name. Some nights the fear was so thick she couldn't breathe. Her heart raced, her chest locked. She'd get up and pace the dark bedroom in her nightgown, trying to talk herself down, while her mind painted picture after picture of the gutter waiting for her. And other nights, the fear turned into something hotter. Rage. How dare he? How dare Walter let her give 40 years? 40 years, believing they were partners, believing she was safe, and then reveal in death, when she couldn't ask him a single question, that she'd been nothing but paid help the whole time. How dare he choose those 3, those greedy, ungrateful children, over the woman who'd loved him with everything she had? But rage takes fuel, and Nell was running on empty. So mostly she just felt numb, going through the motions, packing up a life that turned out to be a lie. She packed 3 suitcases of clothes. She threw most of it away. What was the point of keeping it? These were the clothes Walter had wanted, the persona he'd wanted her to wear, the costume. She packed 2 boxes of things that were actually hers, photographs from before the marriage, her parents, her young self smiling at a future that hadn't happened, letters her mother had written her, a few books that had belonged to her grandmother. That was it. 40 years, 3 suitcases and 2 boxes. On the 28th day, she was at the kitchen sink when she heard them in the dining room. Roland and Vivian. They either didn't know she could hear or didn't care. She'd put her money on didn't care. I honestly can't believe he left her anything, Vivian was saying, voice carrying clear across the house. That Harrogate place is worth 50,000. Maybe. He should have left her nothing. He felt guilty, Roland said. 40 years is a long time to string someone along, even if she was basically the help. The Harrogate place was his way of easing his conscience without actually taking anything from us. Well, she should be grateful we're being so civilized about all this. Most women her age, no skills, no family. They end up in a shelter. At least she can sell that dump and have a few years. And then they laughed. They laughed together, light and easy, the laughter of people who have never once worried about a roof or a meal or a future. Nell stood at that sink, gripping the edge, knuckles white, and she wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the coffee cup across the room. She wanted to walk into that dining room and tell them everything she'd swallowed for 40 years. The cruelty, the entitlement, the way they treated a woman who'd remembered every one of their birthdays. But she didn't, because 40 years of training held. Even now, even at the end, don't make a scene. Don't raise your voice. Be gracious. Be quiet. Be the woman who never demands anything. The conditioning held, but something underneath it had started to crack. On her last morning, Nell walked through the house one final time. She'd expected grief. She'd braced for it. 40 years of memories coming for her room by room. Instead, she felt almost nothing. The master bedroom, where she'd slept beside Walter for 4 decades. Just a room, 4 walls, a window, furniture that had never been hers. The guest rooms she'd kept like shrines for children who barely visited. Just rooms. The living room where she'd played hostess for people who never saw her. The kitchen where she'd cooked 10,000 meals nobody thanked her for. Just rooms. Just rooms in a house that had never, it turned out, been her home. The only place that hurt was the garden. She stood among the roses she'd planted that first optimistic spring. The herbs, the perennials. This was the only patch of earth in 40 years that had ever felt like hers, and now it would belong to strangers, people who would never know the woman who'd made it bloom. She knelt down, she touched the soil, she let herself cry. Just for a minute, just for the garden. Then she stood up, brushed off her knees, and she was done. At 1 o'clock, she loaded the Honda, 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and the wedding photo. She'd taken it off the mantle despite Roland's protest that it was technically house property. She looked him dead in the eye when he said it. Then sue me, she'd said, and for once, for one beautiful second. Roland hadn't known what to say. He showed up at 1:30, early, making sure she actually left. The movers come at 2, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I'll supervise, drop the keys at Marcus's office this afternoon. Nell stood by her car, the brown envelope on the passenger seat beside her purse, and she heard herself speak, quiet, but with a weight she hadn't known she still owned. Roland, do you have any idea what it's like to give someone 40 years of your life and be told it meant nothing? His face went red. Father left you a property. You're not getting nothing. Your father left me a mystery. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. A house I've never seen, in a town I've never heard of. You got millions, and the mansion, and the comfort of knowing he saw you as his legacy. I got a rusty key and 30 days to disappear. She opened the car door. So no, Roland, I don't think you have the first idea what this has been like. She got in before he could answer, before she could say anything else, before the numbness that had been protecting her could crack all the way open. She started the engine. The GPS glowed on the dashboard. 47 Oakwood Lane, Harrogate, MA. 2 hours and 14 minutes. 2 hours and 14 minutes to a future she couldn't see. And as she pulled out of the driveway, as the Brookline mansion shrank in her rearview mirror, as 40 years fell away behind her like something she'd left at the curb, Eleanor Ashby made herself a promise. Whatever waited for her at the end of that drive, whether it was shelter or a ruin, whether the house was worth something or worth nothing at all, she would survive it. She was 68 years old, with nothing left to lose, except her dignity. And she would be damned if she'd lose that too, because she was beginning to understand something she'd never had the chance to learn in 40 years of safety, that having nothing left to lose is its own strange kind of freedom. She drove west, toward Harrogate, toward the rusty key, toward whatever Walter had hidden from her and from everyone for 40 silent years. She didn't know yet that the cruelest will she'd ever heard was about to become the greatest gift she'd ever been given. But the road was long, and the oaks were waiting, and the truth, like always, was patient. The road to Harrogate started out ordinary. Highway, then a smaller highway, then a county road with a gas station and a feed store, and a church with a sign that said, "God answers email," which made Nell laugh out loud alone in her car for the first time in weeks. The laugh surprised her. She thought that part of her was broken. Apparently not. Then the GPS told her to turn, and Harrogate began. It was small, smaller than small, maybe 15 buildings clustered around a town square that wasn't really a square so much as a patch of grass that had decided to call itself one. A general store with a faded green awning, a diner with checkered curtains in the window, a post office the size of a garden shed, a gas station with 2 pumps, a white church with a modest steeple, a library that looked like it had been built when Lincoln was alive. Vivian's words came back to her. Middle of nowhere, old falling down house. So far, so accurate. But then something strange happened. As Nell drove slowly down Main Street, people stopped. Not with suspicion, not the way small towns look at strangers, all narrowed eyes and crossed arms. No, they stop the way you stop when someone you've been expecting finally walks through the door. An old man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the general store paused, mid-sweep, and lifted his hand. A small wave. A woman arranging flowers outside the diner turned and nodded, like she was confirming something, to herself. A cluster of teenagers outside the library actually looked up from their phones, which, if you know anything about teenagers, is a miracle on the order of water into wine. Nell gripped the wheel a little tighter. Because that's not normal. Is it? That's not how a town treats a stranger. Unless you're not a stranger. Unless they know exactly who you are. The GPS sent her off Main Street, onto Oakwood Lane, pavement for about 200 yards. Then the pavement just stopped and became a dirt road that led straight into the trees. And what trees? Oaks, ancient ones, trunks so wide 3 people couldn't link arms around them. Their branches reached across the road and tangled overhead into a green tunnel that turned the afternoon sun into something soft and gold, and dappled, dancing across her windshield like light through water. The road was rough, rutted, old tire tracks gone hard in the dirt. Nell crept along at 15 miles an hour, wincing every time the Honda's belly scraped a high spot. A mile, maybe more. It felt like forever. And then the cheerful little voice on her dashboard said, "You have arrived at your destination." Nell stopped the car, and she didn't look up. She sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes down, afraid, because she knew. She just knew. She was about to see a ruin, a collapsing wreck. Rotted roof, broken windows, a porch sagging into the dirt. Vivian's voice in her head. A dump. He should have left her nothing. And then she'd have to figure out where to go. With 3 suitcases and 2 boxes and a Honda, in 68 years and no plan at all. She took a breath. She lifted her eyes, and the world she thought she knew, quietly, completely, fell apart. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't anything like a ruin. The house sat in a wide clearing ringed by those enormous oaks like sentinels standing guard. Gray fieldstone, the kind that had to be 150 years old, maybe more. 2 stories, a steep slate roof that looked, impossibly, intact. White painted trim around windows of old leaded glass that caught the light and threw it back in little diamonds. A heavy oak front door beneath a small covered portico, the supports carved by some hand long dead. Ivy climbed the stone walls, but not the way ivy climbs a wreck. Not chaos, not neglect. It climbed the way ivy climbs in a painting of an English country estate, like someone wanted it there, like someone had trained it year after patient year. The grounds around the house were overgrown. That part was true, but under the overgrowth, Nell could see the bones of something beautiful. Stone pathways half swallowed by grass. Garden beds gone wild where roses bloomed untamed and reckless. What had clearly been a kitchen garden, now a tangle of herbs and wildflowers fighting for the sun. And a fountain, a stone fountain, silent now, dry, but standing, elegant, waiting. It was wild, yes. It was overgrown, certainly. But it was the most beautiful thing Nell had ever seen in her life. Like a secret garden that time had reached for and couldn't quite take. She sat in her car, and she could not make her brain hold what her eyes were telling it. This was the dump. This was the falling down house in the middle of nowhere. This was the remainder footsteps. Nell turned. Coming up the dirt road from the direction of town was an elderly woman, walking with the kind of purpose you don't expect from someone who had to be in her mid-70s. A simple cotton house dress, a wicker basket over one arm covered with a checkered cloth. She walked right up to the car, and she looked through the windshield, straight at Nell. "You're Nell," she said. Not a question. A fact. Stated with absolute unshakable certainty. Like she'd been waiting at that window for years, and Nell had simply finally arrived. Nell opened the door, climbed out on legs that still didn't feel entirely like hers. "Yes," she managed. "How? How did you know?" The woman smiled. "We've been waiting for you, dear." And the floor tilted again, the same way it had in Marcus's office. Except this time, the world wasn't falling down. It was rearranging itself into something Nell didn't yet have words for. The woman's name was Margaret Doyle, Maggie. She ran the general store, the one with the faded green awning. She lived in Harrogate her whole life, and she said that like it was the most natural sentence in the world. She held out the basket. Bread, eggs, milk, coffee, a little cheese. Figured you'd need something. The house has been kept up, but there's no food in it. Nell took the basket automatically. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind had gone completely offline. "Margaret, I'm sorry, Maggie. You said you've been waiting for me. How long?" "Since Walter passed." Maggie said it gently, like she understood she was handing Nell something heavy. "He told us years ago. When he goes, his wife Nell would come. Said to watch for a woman in an older Honda. Said her name would be Eleanor, but everyone called her Nell." Nell's mouth went dry. "Walter told you that," she said. "When?" And here is the part where the ground didn't just tilt. It dropped out entirely. "Walter came here every month, dear, for 40 years. The basket nearly slipped from Nell's hands. 40 years every month, all those trips, all those weekends. The property he'd inherited, the place in the country, the need to decompress, the little bags she'd packed for him with her own 2 hands, the notes she'd tucked in the side pocket. 'I love you. Drive safe.' 40 years. He'd been coming here. He maintained the house." Maggie went on, watching Nell's face the way you watch someone standing at the edge of something. "Took care of the grounds best he could. Sometimes he'd come for a weekend, sometimes longer. He told us, when he died, you'd inherit, and you wouldn't know about it first. He said he kept it secret, for your protection. The words stopped Nell cold. My protection, her voice cracked on it. Protection from what? From them, I'd imagine. Maggie's voice softened. The ones who took everything else. His children from the first marriage. And Nell, standing in a clearing, holding a basket of eggs, in a town she'd never heard of, began very slowly to understand that she had spent 40 years not knowing the man she'd married at all. Maggie started toward the house, gestured for Nell to follow. Come on, I'll help you get settled. House is unlocked. Walter never locked it. Never. Said there was nothing in Harrogate worth stealing, and if a soul needed shelter, they were welcome to it. Maggie glanced back, something warm and a little sad in her face. That's the kind of man he was. Here anyway. Here anyway. 2 words, and in them an entire second life Nell had known nothing about. She followed Maggie up the stone path, past the wild roses, past the dry fountain, to the heavy oak door. Maggie took the rusty iron key from Nell's hand. The same key, the remainder, the joke, the insult, and she slid it into the lock. It turned, smooth, silent, despite the rust, like it had been waiting for this exact hand. The door swung open. Welcome to your sanctuary, Maggie said quietly, and stepped aside. That's what he called it, the sanctuary. Welcome home, Nell. Nell stepped across the threshold, and everything she thought she understood about her own life, about her marriage, about the man who just publicly called her hired help, came apart in her chest like ice breaking on a spring river. The inside was beautiful, not falling apart, not abandoned, not a dump, beautiful. Wide plank wood floors that glowed with age and care, the patina of decades of someone polishing them by hand. A massive stone fireplace dominating one wall, its mantel carved from a single piece of oak. Furniture that was simple, but quietly, obviously expensive. A worn leather sofa, reading chairs angled to catch the light, built-in bookshelves crowded with leather-bound volumes, hand-woven rugs in soft muted colors, leaded windows scattering forest light across the floor in shifting patterns, and everywhere, photographs, on the walls, on the shelves, on every surface that would hold a frame, photographs of Nell on their wedding day, young, radiant, so full of a hope that hadn't yet learned to be afraid. Nell in the Brookline garden, kneeling in the dirt, hands filthy, laughing at something off camera. Pure unguarded joy on her face. Nell reading in a chair, afternoon sun in her hair. Nell asleep on a porch she didn't recognize. This porch, this house. Nell at every age, in every season, in 100 small, ordinary private moments across 40 years. All of them photographed, all of them framed, all of them displayed. Like a museum, a private museum, dedicated entirely to her. She turned in a slow circle, the basket of eggs forgotten in her hands, and she could not speak. He loved you, Maggie said softly. From the doorway, anyone who walked in here knew it the second they crossed the threshold. This was his shrine to you, his secret place, where he could come and remember who he really was. Underneath all that performance, all that Boston. And Nell, who had not cried at the funeral, who had been too shocked, who had gone numb at the will and stayed numb through 30 days of being erased. Nell finally broke, not the quiet, dignified crying she'd done in the car. This was something older, something that came from a place she'd kept sealed for 40 years. She stood in the center of a room full of pictures of herself, surrounded by overwhelming, undeniable, devastating proof that she had been loved the whole time, and the man who'd loved her had never once said so out loud. Maggie crossed the room, took the basket gently from her hands, set it down, and guided her to the worn leather sofa. She let Nell cry for a long time. She didn't say they're there. She didn't say it's all right. She just sat, the way real friends do, and waited. When the storm finally passed, Maggie stood. "Let me show you the rest," she said. "Then I'll leave you be. You'll need to rest, but you need to see it first. You need to understand what Walter really left you." She led Nell through the house like someone who had walked these rooms 100 times. The kitchen, a charming collision of old and new. An antique wood stove standing beside modern appliances. Copper pots hanging from a rack. A deep farmhouse sink. Open shelves of beautiful dishes Nell had never seen before in her life. The dining room, a long oak table that could seat 12, though clearly it rarely had. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, simple, comfortable, and the master with another fireplace and windows that looked out into the green sea of oaks. And more photographs, dozens more, including ones Nell had never known existed. Candid shots, stolen moments, her caught unaware just living. He must have taken them when she wasn't looking. For 40 years, he'd been collecting her. "How is all this kept up?" Nell asked, her voice thick as they came back down the stairs. 40 years, he couldn't have done all of it himself. "A fund," Maggie said. "Walter set it up with the bank in town, pays for everything, utilities, property taxes, maintenance, repairs, all of it, for the next 50 years. Nell stopped on the stairs. 50 years, she repeated. "You'll never pay a dime for this place, dear. Never have to worry. Never have to fear losing it." And Nell, who had spent 28 nights lying awake, doing terrible arithmetic in the dark. $50,000. 3 years. 4 if she starved. Nell sat down right there on the stairs because the arithmetic had just changed. All of it. Everything. "But why," she said, almost a whisper. "Why hide it for 40 years? Why let me think I was getting nothing while they got everything? Why not just tell me?" Maggie sat down on the step beside her, took her hand. "Because of them," she said. "Walter knew. If those 3 ever found out about this place, they'd find a way to take it. Lawyers can always find a way. He told me that himself. Said he'd spent his whole life watching people do it, watching families tear each other to pieces over money." She squeezed Nell's hand. "So he hid it. From everyone. Even from you. Because the only way to protect it was to make sure no one knew it existed until his death made it final. Made it yours. And nothing they could do could change it." She stood and held out her hand again to help Nell up. "There's one more thing. The thing he really wanted you to find. Come on." Maggie led her to a door beneath the staircase, a small door Nell hadn't even noticed walking in. She opened it, and inside was a study, maybe 10 feet by 12, no windows, 3 walls lined floor to ceiling with built-in shelves. But instead of books, the shelves held folders, binders, document boxes, all of them meticulously labeled, in Walter's precise, unmistakable hand. And the 4th wall held a beautiful antique mahogany desk, a green-shaded banker's lamp, a worn leather chair that had clearly been sat in 1,000 times. And there, in the exact center of the desk, positioned with obvious deliberate care, a thick cream-colored envelope. "My beloved Nell," written across the front in his hand. "This," Maggie said softly from the doorway, "is what he really wanted you to find. This is why he built the sanctuary." Nell crossed the room. She picked up the envelope. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind he'd always used for things that mattered, and it was sealed with actual wax, a real wax seal, like something from another century, something ceremonial, something sacred. She broke the seal. Inside, 5 pages, covered in his handwriting. She sat down in his chair, under the green lamp, in the heart of his secret. And she began to read. My dearest, most beloved Nell, if you're reading this, I am gone, and you found the sanctuary. I am sorry, more sorry than these pages can hold, that it had to happen this way, that I couldn't share this place with you while I was alive, couldn't tell you, couldn't let you understand what I was doing all these years. But Roland, Vivian, and Desmond were always watching, always waiting for any excuse to challenge my decisions, any opening to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. If they'd known about this property, they would have found a way to take it. I know this. I spent my whole career as a lawyer. I have watched it happen 100 times. So I hid it. For 40 years I hid it and protected it and prepared it for you. I know what my will said. I know how those words must have landed. Sitting in Marcus's office, hearing yourself described as adequately compensated. Domestic help. Please, please understand. I wrote it that way on purpose, with calculation, because I knew those three would read every word, hunting for a crack. So I gave them exactly what they wanted, the visible wealth, the obvious prizes, the things they could brag about. I gave them the Brookline house, which is mortgaged nearly to the roof and saddled with preservation requirements I built into the deed years ago that will cost them a fortune to maintain. I gave them accounts locked in trusts so tangled they'll spend years just trying to touch them. I gave them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. But you, my most beloved Nell, to you I gave everything that actually matters. Nell's hand pressed to her mouth. The letter went on, and every line was a small earthquake. The house, he wrote, sat on 247 acres of protected woodland. He'd had it assessed the year before he died. The land was worth approximately $3.2 million to conservation groups who had already expressed serious interest. The house itself as a historical structure, another $800,000. Nell read the number 3 times, $4 million. She, Eleanor Ashby, who had lain awake doing the math on 50,000, who had pictured the shelter, the gutter, the bed where nobody knows your name, was richer than all three of those children combined. She started to laugh, a wet, hiccuping, disbelieving laugh. And then she kept reading, and the laugh died in her throat, because the letter wasn't done. There is more. The filing cabinets in this study contain documents I've accumulated over a lifetime of legal practice. Information about powerful families, influential people, those who believed their secrets were safely buried. I never used any of it. That would have been wrong. But I kept it, documented, organized, because information, Nell, is insurance. If Roland, Vivian, or Desmond ever discover this place, if they ever try to challenge your ownership, if they ever try to make your life difficult, you will have the means to protect yourself. The files bearing their names contain matters they would very much prefer stayed private. Use them only if you must, but know they are there. And know this above all, every photograph in this house was taken with love. Every hour I spent here was spent thinking of you, missing you, wishing I could bring you, and knowing I couldn't. Not until my death made everything safe. You were the best part of my life, the only pure, good, real thing in a life that was otherwise all performance, all obligation, all appearances. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to defend you while I was alive. I'm sorry I chose keeping the peace over standing up for the woman I loved. I'm sorry I let you feel second best, when you were always, always, first. I failed you in life by being weak. I hope I have succeeded in death by being clever. This sanctuary is yours, to live in, to sell, to become whatever you wish. But know that it was built from love, protected by love, and given to you with more love than I ever managed to speak aloud while I was breathing. You deserve someone braver than me, someone strong enough to choose you out loud. But I gave you what I could. This place, this protection, this proof that you were cherished, even when I was too weak to show it. Forever and always yours, Walter. Nell set the letter down on the desk, and for a long moment she just sat there, under the green lamp, in the dark little room, while 40 years rearranged themselves in her chest into a shape she could finally understand. He'd been a coward. That was true. He'd let her hurt. For 4 decades, he'd chosen silence over courage every single time. And he'd loved her, desperately, devotedly, with a love so careful and so patient it had built her a fortress and disguised it as abandonment. Both things were true. That was the hardest part. Both things were true at once. Maggie was still in the doorway, quiet, patient, kind. He was a complicated man, she said. Flawed, weak in some ways, sure, but that love. She shook her head. That love was the one thing he was never confused about. Not for a single day. Nell wiped her face. She nodded. Then she stood, and she turned to the filing cabinets, because she had to know. She had to see if it was all real. The whole impossible thing. She opened the top drawer of the first cabinet and found exactly what he'd promised. The deed, her name, sole owner, since June of 1984, 3 months after their wedding, the trust documents, the fund, the 50 years, legal paper after legal paper confirming every word he'd written. The second cabinet was the sensitive material, folders labeled with the names of prominent Boston families, deals, arrangements, secrets that powerful people had paid good money to keep buried. And the third cabinet. The third cabinet made Nell catch her breath. One thick folder. Roland Ashby, Vivian Ashby Prescott, Desmond Ashby. She pulled it out with shaking hands, sat back down at the desk, and opened it. What she found was devastating in its detail and brilliant in its design. The trusts Walter had left his children weren't inheritances. Not really. They were elaborate time-release structures built to make the money nearly impossible to reach. Roland's $2.8 million could be accessed only in $100,000 increments, once a year, and only if he maintained continuous employment verified by his tax returns, and only if he passed an annual character evaluation conducted by an independent trustee, a retired judge, famous for taking ethics very seriously. Vivian's trust had the same restrictions, plus a requirement that she maintain stable family relationships, which, given her 3 divorces and her own estranged children, was a quiet surgical impossibility. Desmond's inheritance was structured as a business investment trust, requiring his active hands-on management. If he didn't personally run it, day to day, it would dissolve automatically and go to charity. The Brookline mansion, the prize they'd been so hungry for. Walter had buried it in historic preservation easements years ago. Any sale would have to crawl through months of committee reviews and approvals, and it was mortgaged, heavily. He'd taken out a substantial loan against it just 2 years before he died, a loan the children would now discover was theirs to pay. He'd given his children exactly what they wanted, in exactly the way that would make them miserable. And he'd given Nell freedom, security, peace. She sat in Walter's chair, in Walter's secret room, surrounded by Walter's careful, patient, perfectly legal revenge. And she started to laugh. She couldn't help it. After the shock, after the grief, after the humiliation and the terror and the 28 nights of arithmetic in the dark, she sat there and laughed until her sides ached, until Maggie started laughing too. Both of them, in a windowless room, howling at the brilliance of a dead man. Nell spent her first 2 weeks in Harrogate in a kind of daze, learning the house, learning the town. The maintenance fund was real. Everything worked. The heat came on against the November chill. The pantry she found was stocked with enough to last her months. And every day Maggie came by, with food from her garden or the store, and slowly, person by person, she introduced Nell to Harrogate, and every single person had a story about Walter. Pastor Lowell, a kind man in his 60s, told her Walter had paid for the entire church roof 3 years back, wouldn't let them hang a plaque, wouldn't let them say his name from the pulpit, said a church just needs a sound roof to keep its people dry. That was all. Mrs. Hartley, who'd lived in Harrogate her whole life, told her Walter had quietly funded her grandson's entire college education, set it up as an anonymous scholarship. But we figured it was him, changed that boy's life, first in our family with a degree. Sarah, the young librarian, told her that when the town budget got cut and the library was about to close, Walter showed up one afternoon with a check and 5,000 new books. He said a town without books isn't really a town. Walter had lived a whole other life here. Here he'd been generous, engaged, kind in ways you could touch. Here he'd been the man he wanted to be, instead of the man his Boston life and his children's contempt had made him into. He talked about you constantly, Maggie told her one evening. Tea on the now clean stone porch, the oaks gone gold and rust in the autumn light. Every visit he'd stop by the store, we'd chat. He always asked if I thought the house was ready for his Nell, if there was anything more he should do. He'd show me pictures on his phone, tell me stories. She smiled. He said you were the only person who ever loved him for himself, not for what he could provide, not for what he could achieve, just him. Nell looked out at the trees and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. 2 weeks and the phone rang. Marcus Holloway. Nell, I hope you're settling in. I wanted to give you a heads up. Something in his voice. She sat down. Roland called me yesterday, Marcus said. He's retained attorneys. He's going to challenge the will. Nell's hand tightened on the phone, but her voice came out calm, calmer than she'd expected. On what grounds? He's claiming the Harrogate property is a marital asset, subject to division. He says Walter deliberately undervalued it, and that you're entitled to half the marital estate, while the three of them are entitled to the other half. He wants a court to force you to sell and split everything 4 ways. And Nell, sitting on a stone porch, in a house full of photographs of her own face, surrounded by filing cabinets that held a lifetime of a dead man's secrets, looked out at the golden oaks and smiled. Let him try, she said, because for the first time in her entire life, Eleanor Ashby was not afraid. 3 days later, the Mercedes came up the dirt road. Nell saw it from the upstairs window, black, gleaming, absurdly out of place on a rutted country lane, bottoming out on every high spot the way her old Honda had. She watched it lurch and scrape its way through the green tunnel of oaks. 3 of them inside, Roland driving, Vivian in front, Desmond in back, the whole family, come to collect. She watched them park, watched them step out, and watched their faces, because that was the part she would remember. Their faces. They'd come expecting a dump, a shack, a desperate, broken old woman they could frighten into signing whatever they put in front of her. They'd come to win. And then they looked up. Roland stopped halfway out of the car. Vivian's hand froze on the door. Desmond for once put his phone away. All 3 of them stood in the clearing, staring at the gray stone house, the slate roof, the leaded windows throwing back the light, the wild roses, the ancient oaks standing guard like they'd been guarding this place for 150 years, and the confidence drained out of their shoulders. Right there, in real time. Nell watched it go. And something in her, something that had been bent for 40 years, slowly, quietly, stood up straight. She let them knock. She made them wait. Just a moment, just long enough. Then she came down the stairs and opened the heavy oak door, calm, composed, a woman entirely at home. Hello, Roland, Vivian, Desmond, pleasant as anything. Would you like to come in? They followed her inside, and she watched them see it. The wood floors that glowed, the carved oak mantel, the leather sofa, the shelves of leather-bound books, the quality of it, the age of it, the obvious, undeniable value of every single thing, and the photographs. She watched them see the photographs. Nell on every wall, Nell on every surface, Nell young and laughing and loved. A house, a whole house, built as a shrine, to the woman their father had publicly called to help. Vivian's face did something Nell had never seen it do before. It faltered. Please, sit down. Nell gestured at the living room. I'll make tea. She made them tea. She used the beautiful china she'd found in the kitchen cabinets, the good cups, the ones that had probably belonged to the house a century ago. She carried in the tray. She poured. She handed each of them a cup with steady hands, and she watched them squirm. Because they'd come to find her on her knees, and instead they'd found her pouring tea in a $4 million house. Gracious, centered, radiating a quiet power none of them had ever once seen in her. Roland cleared his throat, the way his father used to. The resemblance turned Nell's stomach. Nell, we came to discuss the property situation. We think there's been a misunderstanding about Father's will and what this place is worth. Nell took a slow sip of her tea. Really, she said, what kind of misunderstanding? Father clearly didn't understand the true value of this property when he left it to you. Vivian's voice sharpened. That old edge, the one she used when she thought she had the upper hand. Now that we've looked into it, we realize it's worth considerably more than anyone knew. As his children, his primary heirs, we believe we're legally entitled to a share of all significant marital assets. This isn't a marital asset, Nell said, calm, even. It was deeded to me in 1984 as a gift, completely separate from the marriage. I have all the documentation. We don't believe that's binding, Desmond said. First words he'd spoken. A gift of that value given during a marriage should be joint property, subject to division. Then I suppose, Nell said, setting down her cup, you'll have to take me to court. A silence. She let it sit. She let it stretch. But before you do that, she said, before you make that decision, I think there's something you should see. And she stood, and she walked to the study under the stairs, and she came back, carrying one thick folder. She laid it on the coffee table, right in the middle, between all three of them, their names on the tab, in their father's handwriting, Roland, Vivian, Desmond. This folder, Nell said, contains documentation about the trusts your father actually established for you, the ones you're about to discover when you try to touch your money. Roland's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to her. It also contains, Nell went on, information about certain personal and business matters that all three of you would very much prefer stayed private. The color started leaving Roland's face. Your father practiced law in this city for nearly 50 years, she said, and he documented everything he learned about everyone, including his own children. He never used it. That would have been beneath him. But he kept it, organized, precise, and he left it, all of it, to me. You're bluffing, Roland said. I never bluff. Nell met his eyes. Your father taught me that. She tapped the folder once. Roland, there are matters in here about some of your business dealings. That wouldn't survive daylight. Vivian, your financial arrangements during your divorces weren't entirely above board. Were they? And Desmond, your company has some accounting that the tax authorities would find fascinating. The room had gone very still. Three grown adults, pale, frozen, looking at a folder on a coffee table like it was a live thing that might bite. And then Nell did something none of them expected. Something she hadn't been fully sure she would do. Right up until the moment she did it. She picked the folder back up, and she set it down on the side table. Out of reach, closed. But here's the thing, she said. Quiet now, almost gentle. I'm not going to use it. Vivian blinked. What? I said I'm not going to use it. Nell sat back down, folded her hands. I'm 68 years old. I spent 40 of those years swallowing every cruel thing the three of you ever said to me. 40 years. And do you know what I learned in all that time? Nobody answered. I learned what it feels like to be made small, Nell said. To be erased, to have someone decide your whole life was worth nothing. And I would not wish that on anyone. She paused. Not even on you. She looked at each of them, one at a time. I could destroy you, every one of you, with what's in that folder. Your reputations, your standing, everything you've spent your lives protecting. I could burn it all down. And part of me wanted to. I won't lie about that. Roland swallowed. But that's not who I am, Nell said. And it's not who your father was either, underneath all his cowardice. So I'm going to do what he would have done. I'm going to give you a choice. She let that land. Drop the lawsuit, accept the will exactly as it was written, walk out of here and leave me alone, in my home. We never have to see each other again. And that folder stays closed. Forever, you have my word. She paused. Or you fight me, and I open it, and everything your father collected comes out. All of it. Silence. The antique clock on the mantel ticked, loud in the quiet. And then Nell did the second thing they didn't expect. She softened. There's one more thing you should know, she said, about the trusts. Your father didn't lock that money away to punish you. I read his letter. I understand now what he was doing. She drew a breath. Those conditions, the employment, the character reviews, the family requirements, they aren't a cage. They're a door. If you can meet them, if you can become, even a little, the people he hoped you might be, the money opens up, more than you know. There's a great deal more in those trusts than you've been told. He left it for the version of you he prayed you'd grow into. Vivian's jaw was tight. You expect us to believe that? I don't expect anything from you, Nell said. I'm just telling you what's true. Your father didn't hate you. He was disappointed in you. There's a difference. And disappointment means he still hoped. Right up until the end. The clock ticked. Roland looked at the folder on the side table, then at the photographs on the walls. All those pictures of Nell. All that proof of a love his father had never managed to show out loud to anyone, to her, to them. And something in his face cracked. We'll need to discuss this, he said, quietly. The bluster gone. Privately. Of course, Nell said. Take all the time you need. She stood. The meeting was over, and everyone in the room knew it. She walked them to the door. But before they reached it, she stopped and she said one last thing. Not cruel, not triumphant, just true. Your father loved you, in his complicated way. I believe that. But he loved me too. He just never had the courage to say it while he was alive. She looked at the three of them. Don't make his mistake. Don't wait until it's too late to say the true thing. It costs you nothing, and it's worth everything. I learned that 3 weeks too late. They left without another word. Nell stood on the porch and watched the black Mercedes lurch and scrape its way back down the dirt road, out through the oaks, out of Harrogate, out of her life. And then she went back inside, and she sat in Walter's favorite chair, by the window, with the golden light coming through the leaded glass, and she cried. But these were not the tears of the office, not grief, not fear, not humiliation. These were tears of pure, clean relief, in the first faint stirrings of peace. They dropped the lawsuit within the week. Marcus called to tell her. She could hear the smile in his voice. They withdrew everything, he said. No conditions, no negotiation. Roland's attorney called this morning, said his client had reconsidered. A pause. Nell, I don't know what you said to them, But whatever it worked. I didn't say anything they didn't need to hear, Nell said, and that was all she ever told anyone about that afternoon. The Brookline mansion sold. Eventually, 9 months on the market, because the moment buyers learned about the mortgage and the preservation easements and the years of committee reviews required for any change, they walked, one after another. The siblings dropped the price and dropped it again. By the time it finally sold after the mortgage and the fees and the lawyers, they netted a fraction of what they dreamed. The trusts proved exactly as Walter had designed them. Tangled, conditional, maddening. Roland's 100,000 a year contingent on a character review by a judge who did not grade on a curve. Vivian snarled in family requirements she couldn't meet. Desmond's dissolving slowly because he couldn't be bothered to run it. Walter's revenge, patient, subtle, perfectly legal, played out exactly as written, from beyond the grave. But Nell didn't gloat about it. She found to her own surprise that she didn't even think about it much, because she was busy. She was busy living. Over the next 6 months, Nell did something she'd never done in 40 years of marriage. She made the house her own. She hired workers from town, and together they brought the gardens back. The fountain ran again, clear water catching the sun. The stone paths were cleared and re-leveled. The roses pruned and ordered bloomed in proper beds. The herb garden grew in tidy rows. She updated the kitchen carefully, lovingly, keeping all its old soul. She chose new art for the walls. She didn't take down the photographs of herself. She left every one of them. But she added her own choices beside them. Her grandmother's books filled the shelves. Furniture arrived that suited her comfort, her taste, her body, hers, and Harrogate. Harrogate took her in. She volunteered at the library Tuesdays and Thursdays. She helped at the community center on Wednesdays. She went to the white church every Sunday and sat in the same pew and was greeted by name by people who were genuinely simply glad to see her. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor Ashby had friends, real ones. Maggie became the sister she'd never had. The young people in town came to her for advice. Children waved when she walked down Main Street. She belonged somewhere, and the belonging had nothing to do with being anyone's wife. She was just Nell. And Nell, it turned out, was enough. One afternoon, sorting papers in Walter's study, she found one more envelope, tucked into the very back of a drawer, sealed, labeled in his hand, for Nell's future. Open when you're ready. She held it a long moment. Then she opened it. Inside, a deed, 20 acres on the edge of town, a small barn, a cottage, in her name, paid in full, and documentation of a trust, $500,000. Establish, the paper said, for whatever projects or purposes Eleanor Ashby chooses to pursue in her new life. And a note, in his careful hand. For your future, whatever you want it to be, build something, create something, transform something. This is your blank canvas. Paint it however makes you happy. You spent 40 years living my life. Now please live yours. Nell read it twice, and then she sat very still, and she knew, just knew, exactly what she wanted to do. She'd build a place for women like her, women who had spent their whole lives taking care of everyone else, and had woken up one day to find no one had thought to take care of them. Widows with nowhere to land, women leaving hard marriages with nothing but a suitcase and a fear of the dark, women who'd been made to feel small and needed a place to remember they were not, a place to land, to breathe, to figure out the next chapter. She'd call it Ashby House, and it would be Walter's last gift, transformed into something that caught other women, the way this house had caught her. The day Ashby House opened, the whole town came. Maggie cut the ribbon. Pastor Lowell said a blessing. Sarah from the library brought a box of books for the shelves. Mrs. Hartley brought her famous pie. And the porch, the wide stone porch where Walter had once sat alone with his pictures and his secret. was full, full of people, full of laughter, full of life. And one car came up the dirt road that Nell hadn't expected. A modest sedan, not a Mercedes. Desmond. He got out alone. He stood at the edge of the clearing a long moment the way they all had that first day, looking at the house, but his face wasn't hungry now. It was something else, something quieter, something like shame finally grown up into something better. He walked over to where Nell stood. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I know," she said. "You'd have brought a lawyer." A small, surprised laugh, the first honest thing she'd ever seen on his face. "I've been doing the trust thing," he said. "Running the business. Myself, it's hard. Harder than I thought." He looked down. "Turns out my father knew that. Knew I'd never done a hard thing in my life. Until he made me." "He believed you could," Nell said. "That's why the door was there. Not the cage. The door." Desmond was quiet a moment. "He really loved you," he said, looking up at the house, at the windows full of her face. "All those years. We had no idea." "Neither did I," Nell said. "Until the very end." He nodded, looked at his shoes. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for the way for the way I." He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. "I know," Nell said gently. "Thank you for coming." And she meant it, because forgiveness, she'd learned, isn't something you give people because they've earned it. It's something you give yourself, so you can finally put the weight down. Desmond stayed an hour. He talked to Maggie. He ate a slice of Mrs. Hartley's pie. And before he left, he wrote a check for Ashby House. Modest, but real. The first thing perhaps he'd ever given without being made to. It was a start. It was just a start, but Nell had learned that too, that sometimes a start is the whole miracle. That evening, after the last guest had gone, Nell sat alone on the stone porch. The sun was going down behind the ancient oaks, painting the autumn sky in orange and rose and a soft, dusty purple. Somewhere in the new gardens, the fountain whispered. A bird called once and went quiet. She thought about the road that had brought her here, the silence in that office, the word remainder, the rusty key, the terror of those long nights, and then the drive west and the oaks and the basket of eggs, and the house that was never a ruin at all. Walter had been a coward when she needed courage. He'd let her feel second best for 40 years. That was real. That was a wound that would never fully close. And he'd loved her with everything in him and built her a fortress and disguised it as abandonment and trusted that she was strong enough to find it. Both things were true, and she'd finally stopped needing them not to be. Because that was the lesson, the one it had taken her 68 years to learn, that your worth is never decided by the people who discard you. It's decided by the ones who treasure you, even from across a room, even from beyond the grave. She'd spent 40 years being exactly what everyone else needed. And here at last, she was free to find out who she actually was, and to her own quiet delight. At 68, she was just getting started. The sky deepened. The first star came out over the oaks, and down the lane the windows of Ashby House glowed warm and gold, full of light, full of the promise of women who would arrive there broken and leave there whole. Nell pulled her shawl around her shoulders, and she smiled into the gathering dark, because his cowardice had wounded her. Yes, but his love had set her free. And that love, the real kind, the patient kind, the kind that protects you even when it cannot find its voice. That love does not run out, does not age, does not lose its way. It always, always finds the right address.